All right, folks. So this is the Chapter 5 Guided Program Development. We're going to be creating an application called the Decking Cost Calculator, where we calculate the cost of buying different types of wood. The big um, topic we're going to be learning about in this chapter is making decisions, basically if then else statements. We'll be getting into that. And making your applications as bulletproof as possible. So we're going to be using some of the capabilities of the programming language to prevent our users from entering something that could crash our application or entering data that could cause unwanted output. So I'm going to get started by creating a Chapter 5 folder on my flash drive. I'm going to go into my Visual Basic folder, create a new folder, and call it Chapter 5. And I'm going to start Visual Studio, create a new project. So I've got Visual Basic selected. I've got a Windows desktop, a Windows form app. Make sure that when you are creating the new applications, you are browsing and putting the application in your flash drive or wherever you have your folder structure. And also make sure when you give your application its name, you give it the name and spell the name properly. I still have had some students that have not been paying attention and their apps are called Windows App 1 or they spell something wrong. I had one student that tried to rename the application after they created it, and you can't do that. It causes corruption. So just pay attention when you're naming the apps to make sure you've named it properly. So this application is going to be called Decking Cost Calculator. Decking Cost. Okay. Make sure I'm in the right folder, make sure it's spelled properly, and then I can hit OK. It's in my Chapter 5 folder. And here we go. So I'm just going to follow along in the book. If you want to follow along in the book or take a look in the book while you're doing that, that's fine. So the first thing I am going to do is rename my form decking. Okay. Then it says to change the size property of the form to 720 by 431. That is very specific. It's pretty close to that. 20 by 431, but since that's what the book wants, I'll go with that. Just makes it a little smaller, and it wants us to change the back color of the form to white. So we'll make the back color white, and then it wants us to change the title of the form to Decking Cost Calculator. So we're going to change the text property of the form from Form 1 to Decking Cost Calculator. Okay. And then we're putting our heading on the form. So we're going to use a label for that. And we're going to call the label heading. So I'm going to change the name property to LBL heading. Head King heading. And we're going to change the text property of this label to decking cost calculator. Okay, and that wants us to change the text style to Goody Ode style in 24 points. So I'll go over to my font. So 24 and Goody Old Style. I'm not real particular about what fonts you use. Just make sure whatever font you use, it's readable. That's one thing for GUI design. You want to make sure that whoever is looking at your application can actually read what your labels say. Some of the fonts are, they can have some weird fonts and it makes things hard to read. You want to just make sure that, you know, that whoever your users are, um, they're not having to try to figure out what your application says. Okay, so we've got that done. So we're going to add a text box object to capture our footage. We're going to call this txt footage. And then we're going to add a label for that text box. And the label is going to say square footage. We're going to name that label LBL square footage. And we'll change the text property to square footage. Okay. My text box over a little more. We might want to make this label a little bigger and make it the same font just for consistency. So I'm going to go over to my font. The book says to make it 16. It might be a little big, but that's okay. I'm going to make this one Goody as well, just for consistency. I'm not really a huge fan of this font. That's what the book asks for. Sometimes your end users are going to ask for something and you might not agree with it. And sometimes you have to show it to them first and let them see it and then make a decision based on how it looks once they see it. All right, so we've got our heading. I'm going to center these because they don't look like they're in the center. There we go, that's a little better. All right. So the next thing we are doing is adding our group box. And this is a new object that we haven't dealt with before. And you'll notice the group box is not here in our common controls, but if we scroll down this on your desktop, this might be open, but there's different sections here, all Windows forms, common controls, menus and toolbars, data. The group box is in the container control because it's a type of container control. So we're going to add in a group box and put it on the form. Um, the book says change the size to 244 by 106. Somebody told me that that's a little bit small, so we're going to go with that and then we'll resize it afterwards if we need to. Two 4406. Yeah, that's a little small. I'm just going to make it a little bigger. And we'll play with it and change the size as we go. You notice it's a little weird to move a group box, but if you grab it by this little icon, you'll be able to move it that way. Okay, so naming conventions for group boxes are GRP. So we're going to click on our group box and change the name to GRP deck type. Okay. And we're going to change the text property, which will change this caption right here to decking type. Okay, so now our group box has a caption, so we know what it's kind of the type of object or the type of selection we're going to be making. So now we are going to add our radio buttons. We're going to add 3 radio buttons. So our radio buttons are on our common control. So we can just grab 3 radio buttons and throw them in there. Just make sure they're spaced out appropriately. And you'll see once you put your radio buttons inside your group box, they all move together. So anything inside that group box is going to move when you move the group box. They are kind of contained inside that group box for you, which is kind of nice. Okay. So the first one, we're going to give it a name of Rad Lumber. So the naming conventions for radio buttons is RAD. And the name on the first one is pressure treated lumber. So we might have to change the size of our group box. Pressure treated lumber. Let's see. Okay, that's okay. So we've got Rad Lumber, and our second one is redwood. So my second radio button is going to be RAD redwood. Change the text property to redwood. And my third one is going to be composite. So I'm going to change my name to RAD composite. And then my text property to composite. So we have our decking cost calculator with our text box. We're going to enter a square footage. Um, and these are our three decking types, three common decking types that types of wood you might buy. Pressure treated lumber is the cheapest. Redwood is a little more expensive. And composite is like a plastic wood mixed together, and it's the most expensive. So later on, when we get into the coding, we'll assign a cost to each one of these, and then our calculation at the end will be different depending on what we select. All right. So now we are going to add our cost estimate and cost labels. So we're going to do our first label is label cost. So we're going to have two labels here. Cost and it's going to be cost estimate. And then we're going to have another label where our actual estimate is going to go. So I'm going to throw another label in there. And this one is going to be called label cost estimate. And we are going to stick a default value in there. Of just some zeros as a placeholder for ourselves. And I'm going to go ahead and change my font on this one as well. Let's make it a little bigger to stand out. Make it 6, what does it say? Just to make it 14 on this one. So I'll make this one 14. And let's go with that Goody again. Come on, there's our Goody. So just gonna have to space these out a little bit. All right, so that's good. So the next thing we need is two buttons. Calculate and clear button. It looks like according to the spec, we're not putting an exit button on this one. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Oops. So I have room for my buttons. So my button 1 is going to be called calculate. And then my text value is going to be calculated as well. Button a little bigger. And then we're going to put a clear button in there as well. Change the text property to clear. make these the same size. So format, make same size, both. And then I can center in the form. Now it looks like they're having us put the picture box kind of over on the left side here. So I'm going to move this all over a little bit so we have room for this picture box. So let's throw a picture box on here. We're going to make it take up most of our space over here on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. Just make it fill most of the screen. We're going to call our picture box. Make sure you're still naming these objects. Picture box is pick, deck, and depending on how big you made all this stuff, your picture box might have to be a little bit of a different size. I'm just going to move this one down a little bit. So let's scroll down to the image property. And I'm going to make sure project resource is selected. And I'm going to go out to my desktop. I think I have my images. Yes, I have my images on my desktop. My Visual Basic folder, Chapter 5, Deck and Cost Calculator. Where do I have this? Desktop, there it is. Visual Basic Resources, Chapter 5, and Deck. There it is. Okay. And let's just make this size mode to stretch image so it takes up the whole image. So I think that's it for our GUI. So that doesn't look too bad. So we've got text box for the square footage, our 3 selections here. I want to go back and make sure it's something. One more thing we want to do with to prevent errors with our radio buttons is we want to make sure one of these is pre-selected. Okay, so I'm going to select one of my radio buttons, and it has a checked property, and I'm going to make the first one true because we want to make sure the users are selecting something. Because if they just hit calculate without selecting one, the if statement won't know what to do. So by default, we're going to pre-select pressure treated lumber for them. And we're going to check to make sure they've entered a correct value in square footage with our code. But by pre-selecting this one, we'll ensure that they've selected something. They don't make a mistake by not selecting something. That way we don't have to code for that. It's pre-selected. So, and I'll show you how that works when we get started. Okay. So I think we are ready to start coding. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to just double click on my calculate button, and I'm going to go up to the top and start my comments. First comment is my program name. That is Decking Cost Calculator. I'm going to put developer. That is me. What you might want to do here, some people like to do this, is put all of the descriptions here lined up just to kind of make it look even and neat. That's just me being really, really picky about things, but sometimes developers are like that. And we have our date, space over so everything's lined up. Today is 12/8/2020. And purpose of our program, just going to put that comment in. What does it give us for a description? So this app allows users to select a decking type and calculates cost based on type of wood selected. All right. We've got our comments in here. And let's just get into this and start coding. So we're going to need a couple variables. So in our last chapter, when we started declaring variables, I'm going to go ahead and put in my 3 or 4 different sections. So declare variables. So I have placeholders for myself. And on this one, we're going to, our assign and convert is going to be a little different. So I'm not going to put that in there because we're going to assign and convert in a different section. So we'll just start for now with declare variables. So dim, and in this one we don't have any constants because we have three different decking costs, and they could change, but we don't really need to make them constants. So first variable is we're going to capture our decimal footage, and we're not going to be capturing this as a string because we're going to use our if then else statements in our isNumeric function, which is something we're going to introduce here to you to make sure the user has entered that footage as a number. So this footage, we're declaring our footage as decimal because you don't always buy wood in whole numbers. Sometimes, you might buy 20.5 inches or 20.5 feet. What's going on here? Footage as decimal. I'm going to have dec square foot. Cost per square foot. And this is going to be when the user selects one of those radio buttons, we're going to assign whatever footing cost was associated with that wood to this variable. So this is just kind of a placeholder variable for us. And then we have our cost estimate, which is our final calculation. And these are all decimal. Okay. And then we have our 3 lumber costs, and we're going to be setting the costs when we declare the variable. I'm just going to put a space here because this is kind of a little different. So we have our desk lumber cost, and we're going to set that equal to 235 square foot, and we put the D on there as a force literal because we're entering this hard coding it, so you have to put the D when you have when you're doing this so you don't get errors if you have option strict on. And then we have our redwood cost, so we're going to declare dim des redwood costs. And our redwood cost is $7.75. Redwood is expensive. And then finally we have our composite. And that's $8.50. So if something is $8.50 and you're putting a value in, oops, I forgot something here. What did I forget for each of these? Got the type. All right, we've got that. We've got our variables here that we're declaring that we're going to use in our calculations, and we've got our 3 values, or 3 costs of each type of wood. And the last application, we declared these as constants. Could do that here, but we're just not doing it. It just makes it a little easier to do it here. Okay. So the first thing we want to do in this application is we're going to determine if the user entered a numeric value or not. So my comment is going to be, did user enter a numeric value? Okay. We're going to start with our if statement. Say if, then we're going to use a built-in function called isNumeric. So we say if isNumeric, and then we put some parentheses in there. In those parentheses, we put our, oops, our text box. So txt footage dot text. We're saying if the value in text footage dot text is numeric, then we're going to do something. So if I just hit enter after the then, it automatically puts the end if in there for us. Okay. But we have something else in here. We have an else statement. So if it's numeric, we're going to go on with our calculation. If it's not numeric, we want to display, I'm just going to put a comment in here for us. We're going to display error message telling the user to enter a numeric value. So if they entered a numeric value, we're going to do the code, do the calculation, or do some more checking and then do the calculation. If they haven't, then we're going to tell them to enter numeric value. And I like to put my else statement in there when I put my if, and just put a placeholder, and then I'll go back later and I'll enter the code in here. Okay. So in this statement, so now if it's numeric, so we know it's numeric, so we don't have to worry about doing any getting it as a string or anything because we know it's been entered as numeric. So what we can do here is just say des footage, use our variable we created here. Des footage is equal to, and we're going to convert. So it's something a little new. So we convert to decimal, and then our text footage dot text value. Okay. So we've got our value. We know that it's numeric because it passed this test. Okay. So we want to put it in our des footage variable. What we don't know is if they entered a positive or a negative value. So we're going to check for that as well. So now we've checked if it's numeric, so now we want to check if the value is positive. So we're going to do a nested if statement inside this if block. Say if, we've already captured that des footage and we've put the value in there. Okay, so now we say if des footage is greater than 0, so that is it positive, and I'm going to put another comment in here before I go too crazy with this. Did user enter a positive value? Okay, so we have this. So if they entered a positive value, then we're going to do the calculation. If they didn't enter a positive value, we need an else statement in here. So you got to be a little careful here. And I'm just going to put my else inside here. And this if kind of messed up my indenting for me. So you got to be a little bit careful with this. So this inner if statement goes together and this outer if statement goes together. So this else, we have to do another comment here. And if the footage is not greater than 0, that means it entered a negative value. So then we want to tell the user to enter a positive value. Just come up here and put another comment in. We're going to say, tell user to enter a positive value. So what we're doing here is we're making our application bulletproof. So no matter what our user does, and this application isn't going to be completely bulletproof, but it's going to be close. Okay, I'm actually going to put this comment inside else because it wants to do some weird stuff with my indenting. Tell user to enter a positive value. Okay, so it puts it inside that else for me. Okay, so the brunt of our code is going to be here if we've entered a positive value. So in here, I'll put another comment, and my comment is going to be determine the cost per square foot. You'll notice I am doing my comments first before I do the code, and these are just placeholders for myself so I know where I need to do things. I know, 'cause sometimes you can get messed up with the if statements and the nested if statements. It can get a little confusing if there's multiple nesting. So I put my comments in first so I know where I want to do things so I don't get confused. Okay, so this is where the brunt of our work is going to be. We're just going to have a message box statement in here and a message box and statement in here, and then we're pretty much done with this. Okay. So we have two if statements here, and we're going to have another nested if statement in here to look at our radio buttons to determine if what they've selected and then calculate our cost. So in here, where we determine the cost per square foot, I've got another if. So I say if, and we're going to use our radio buttons here. So I'm going to start with rad lumber dot checked then, and I could put rad lumber dot checked equals true, but you don't have to. So if rad lumber is checked, and I need another end if in here. There we go. So if rad lumber is checked, then we are going to set the cost of square foot. So I'm going to say this cost square foot is equal to des lumber cost. So we're going to actually use this value up here. And then else if rad redwood dot checked, then we're going to set the desk cost per square foot just like we did above, but we're going to set this one to desk redwood cost. Where's my redwood? Okay. And then another else if. Add composite. Checked. Then And we do the same thing. Cost per square foot equals the composite cost. I made a little mistake up here, and I want to be consistent, so I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to change this composite to composite cost, just to be consistent. Okay. So I could go in here and comment each one of these lines of code to say what I'm doing, but it's pretty self-explanatory here. I could say set the lumber cost, pressure treated lumber cost, set redwood cost, but it's pretty self-explanatory. But what I will do is right down here after this is where we're going to be doing our actual calculation and displaying our final value in our label. So put a comment in, calculate, and display cost estimate. Okay, so we say this cost estimate is equal to this footage we've captured up here times, we do the asterisk for times, which is shift 8, and then we're going to multiply it by our S cost per square foot, which we've set depending on what radio button they selected. So pretty simple calculation in this one. We're just multiplying the footage by the cost per square foot. And then we're going to display our label. Oops. LBL. And that is cost estimate. Cost estimate dot text. And we're going to set that equal to our S cost estimate that we just displayed, and we have to convert it back to a string. And we want to format it as currency, so we're going to put a C in here. And that is it for our coding for this one, for the calculation. We still have to put in our code for our labels, for our message boxes. So this is a basic code. We'll go in and test it when I'm done doing all of this coding. So we have here, if the desk footage, well, let's start with the top one. So if is numeric text footage. So if our text box was numeric, down here, we want to tell them to enter a numeric value. So I'm going to go in here, and we are going to put in a message box. Okay. And in parentheses, we want to say, please enter a numeric, we need this in quotes, Please enter numeric value for square footage. So you want to, in your message boxes, you want to be as descriptive as possible to kind of tell the user what they did wrong. We're putting 2 commas in here because our second parameter is not used. And this last one is just a title for our message box. Okay. So all we have in here is if they haven't entered a numeric value, we want to tell them to enter a numeric value. It's just going to display that message box. It's just going to be a message box with an OK button on it. They hit enter, and then what we're going to do if they've done something wrong like that is we want to clear the value out that they entered wrong. So text footage dot text blank that out for them. And then we're going to put the focus back text footage. So that after they've made an error, we tell them they made an error, we clear the bad value out. So if they entered an A or a G or a space or nothing, and we put the focus back there. So they know immediately to put a good value in. So we need another message box if they've entered a negative value. So that's what we're going to do right here. And I've got my comment in so I know where I need to do that. Okay, and you'll notice this indents everything for us. So that should make it easier. And these lines, these lines are something new at Visual Studio 17. I think it'll help you guys a little bit with the GUI stuff. So we're going to do another message box, and this one's going to be a little more detailed. We're going to give the users a little more information with this one. The message box, we're going to tell them a little more information here. We're going to say our quotes. You entered. And then we're going to concatenate the value the bad value that they entered in the text box. So you entered, and so I'm going to concatenate the, oops, whoa, what just happened there? S footage dot to string. I need to put a little space in here. It'll all get squished together. So you entered that's footage to string, and you got to have those little quotes there. And then we're going to concatenate. So another ampersand here. Period in, and then a couple spaces. We can be polite. Please enter. So you're going to say you entered -5 or whatever they put in there. Please enter positive value. Oops. And then we've got to close our there we go. So that's our message box. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did here. So I'm just going to copy these 2 bottom lines of code and save myself. Whoops. Undo that. Some reason my keyboard isn't working. Control C. And I'm just going to paste those 2 lines in here because we're doing the same thing. So we tell them you entered a negative value, whatever that negative value was. After they hit OK, it's going to blank that value out and put the focus back there. All right, so that's that. Now, if you're going through this and you run into any errors in here, um, if you use the PDF version of your textbook, there is all this that I'm going through. It's listed in the book so you can look at it, but there's also a code listing. If you go through the index, you can find it. And it'll give you this code all written up. So if you have something wrong, you can compare it to what's in there, or you can just call me, um, whatever's easier for you. Okay, so we've got that. We're going to do a couple more things. We're going to code the clear button here. So I'm going to double click on my clear button. Um, and we'll just put a comment in here, clear out values. Okay, so we're going to do a couple things here. So if the user hits clear, we want to say txt footage, clear, um, LBL cost estimate, text, text the label out, and then we want to make sure our radio buttons are selected the same way they were. So we want to have lumber checked and the other two set to false, because we don't know what was selected last time. So we want to make sure we clear all those out. So I'm going to say rad lumber checked. And we want rad lumber to be checked. So we're going to set that to true. Rad redwood checked equals false. And rad composite checked equals false as well. Okay, so we want to set the lumber default to checked and the other two not to be checked. And the last thing we want to do is put the focus back in our text box. So txt footage dot focus. Okay, so that's our clear button. And then on our form load, have to just clear out a couple things. We want to clear out our cost estimate and set the focus. So remember we put 000.00 in there. We don't want the user to see that, so we're going to clear it out when we start the application. Focus. So txt footage dot focus and label cost estimate dot text blank. So we'll just clear that out. So I am going to save this. Probably should have saved it a couple times as I was going through it. Just be consistent with my spacing here. Some extra spaces there. Okay. Look at all my comments and let's give this a run. See how it works. And I'm going to test. Oh, we have build errors. Let's see. What does it not like? Syntax error. Where? Oh, I got an extra parenthesis in here. We'll just get rid of that and then rerun it. All right, so here's our decking cost calculator. Square footage. So go back and take a look. To make this simple to test it for myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter this just to make sure it's working properly. I know the lumber cost for pressure treated lumber is $235. So if I enter 1, my cost estimate for this one should be $235, which it is. Okay, so let's just test redwood. Redwood is $775, which is correct, and composite should be $850. So I'll say compass, and it's $850. So I know my math is working here. So let's try to do something a little crazy and enter 2.4. Okay, calculus. So now, so I know I can enter a decimal in here. It's formatting properly. So if I did 2.4 times 850, that comes up to 2040. So my math is working. So now we did a bunch of other stuff, right? To check for negative values and check for odd values. So let's say a user is trying to crash this application and they enter, instead of 0, they enter O in here. So this is a non-numeric value and the code wants to convert this to a decimal. So if I hit calculate here, what should happen is that message box should come up telling me to enter a numeric value. So let's see what happens when I select this. So I get my message box up here with an input error and it says, please enter a numeric value for square footage. So the message box is telling me I did something wrong. When I hit OK, it should clear out that 0, reselect things and let me start over again. Okay, so it cleared that out. So what was the other thing that we checked for? Negative values, right? So let me enter -9 and see what happens. So redwood here. So I hit -9, hit calculate, and it says you entered -9. Please enter a positive value. I hit OK. It doesn't let me do anything. Okay. So that's good. And we can enter a large value in here. Let's clear things out. Let's enter a large value in here, 800 or 8,000. Pressure treated lumber, we get $18,800. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that I could try to crash this. I'm not going to tell you everything I could do. This is a pretty bulletproof application, but there's probably a couple things that I could try on this to make it crash. But we have checked for negative values, and we've checked for non-numeric values. So, if I just put some random characters in here and hit calculate, it's going to tell me to enter a numeric value. It's not going to crash. And that's ultimately what we want our applications not to be able to crash. The last thing we want is an error to pop up. The application just closes down on the user and they don't know what they did. Users don't. Usually there'll be some code, but users don't usually remember, what they entered or what that message was. They just tell you, it crashed on me. And as a developer, you've got to, try to retrace their steps and figure out what exactly happened. So this is pretty much it for this application. The applications you go through, the first couple are going to be very similar to this. They will get a little more complicated. One of the cases, you are going to have to do a case statement, but I've documented that for you in the assignment, which one I want you to do a case. So that'll just be a little different than this one. But these should be pretty straightforward. Have fun with these. And that's all I have.